Have you ever wondered what happens when the person you trust most in the world becomes your greatest enemy? When the life you've built on love turns out to be constructed on lies? What if I told you that a simple gas station attendant's warning saved a woman from a plot so calculated, so devastating, that it could have destroyed her forever? This is the story of Rebecca Matthews, a woman who discovered that sometimes the most dangerous predators are the ones who share your bed. My name is Rebecca Matthews. I'm 42 years old, and until 6 months ago, I lived in what everyone called the perfect American dream. A colonial-style house on Maple Street in Rochester, New York, with white picket fences and rose bushes that bloomed every spring. My husband, David Matthews, was everything a woman could want: tall, successful, charming. He worked as a regional manager for a medical supply company, and for 15 years, I believed we were partners in building something beautiful together. The early years were filled with hope. We tried for children, oh, how we tried. 3 miscarriages, 2 years of fertility treatments, and countless nights where I blamed myself for not being able to give him the family he deserved. David would hold me during those dark moments, whispering that I was enough, that our love was complete. But now I know, even then, he was calculating. Even then, he was planning. Everything changed after my parents died in a car accident 2 winters ago. The grief was overwhelming, but there was also responsibility. My father had spent 30 years building a small construction company in Syracuse, and my mother had invested wisely in real estate. Together, they left me with assets worth nearly $800,000. Suddenly, our modest middle class life became something more comfortable. We upgraded to a larger house, bought new cars, took vacations to places we'd only dreamed of, but that's when I started noticing the changes in David. Subtle at first. The way he'd check his phone during dinner, the mysterious late-night calls he'd take outside, the credit card statements he suddenly wanted to handle himself. When I'd ask about his day, his answers became rehearsed, like he was reciting lines from a script he'd memorized. The phone calls were what really worried me. David used to share everything with me, even his work conversations. But now he'd step out onto the porch or down to the garage, speaking in hushed tones that felt secretive. Once, I heard him laugh, but it wasn't the laugh I knew. It was softer, more intimate. The laugh of a man talking to someone he cared about. When I asked him about it, he brushed me off. Just work stuff, honey. New client, very demanding. But something in his eyes, something cold and calculating, made my stomach turn. Then came the trip to Buffalo. David surprised me with it on a Thursday evening, his face brighter than I'd seen it in months. "We need some time together, just us," he said, already pulling out his phone to show me the hotel reservation. "I've booked us a suite at the Marriott downtown. We can walk around the harbor, have dinner at that Italian place you love." I should have been thrilled. For months, I'd been begging him to spend more time with us, to reconnect. But something about the timing, the sudden enthusiasm, it felt wrong. Like he was trying too hard to convince me, or maybe himself. The night before we left, I couldn't sleep. David was snoring peacefully beside me, but I felt this overwhelming need to understand what was happening to our marriage. I'd never invaded his privacy before, but desperation drove me to his home office. In his desk drawer, beneath insurance papers and old bills, I found a folder that made my blood run cold. It was a psychiatric evaluation, with my name on it. According to the papers, I was suffering from severe depression, paranoid delusions, and was considered a danger to myself and others. The signature at the bottom belonged to Dr. Harrison Webb, a psychiatrist I'd never heard of, let alone met. The date was from 3 weeks ago. I sat there in the darkness, reading words that described me as unstable, unpredictable, in need of immediate psychiatric intervention. According to this file, I'd been having episodes, making threats, exhibiting behavior that warranted involuntary commitment. None of it was true, but it looked so official, so convincing. That's when I understood. David wasn't planning a romantic getaway. He was planning to have me committed. The drive to Buffalo was torture. Every mile felt like we were driving toward my doom. David kept glancing in the rearview mirror, his knuckles white as he gripped the steering wheel. He took 3 phone calls during the trip, each one making him more tense. Everything set. I heard him whisper into the phone. "Just stick to the plan." We stopped at a rural gas station about an hour outside Buffalo. The place looked like it hadn't been updated since the 1970s, cracked concrete, faded signs, and a loneliness that seemed to seep from the very ground. David got out to pump gas while I sat in the passenger seat, trying to make sense of what I'd discovered. That's when the attendant appeared. He was young, maybe 25, with kind eyes and work-worn hands. As he cleaned our windshield, he kept glancing at David, then back at me. Something in his expression made me pay attention. While David was checking the oil, the attendant slipped a piece of paper through the crack in my window. His eyes were urgent, almost desperate. Read it, he mouthed silently, then walked away as if nothing had happened. With shaking hands, I unfolded the note. He's not taking you to Buffalo. There's an ambulance waiting 20 miles ahead. Get out now. Trust me. My heart nearly stopped. This stranger, this gas station attendant, somehow knew about David's plan. But how? And why would he help me? I forced myself to stay calm when David returned to the car. I need to use the restroom, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I'll meet you inside. In the small, dimly lit convenience store, I found the attendant restocking shelves. His name tag read Marcus. When he saw me, he gestured toward the back of the store, away from the security cameras. 3 days ago, he whispered, your husband was here with a blonde woman. They were talking about timing, about making sure you couldn't fight back. The woman asked if the psychiatric hold would be permanent, and he said, long enough to transfer everything. After that, it won't matter. I felt the world tilt beneath my feet. Who was the woman? Said she was his wife. His real wife. The words hit me like a physical blow. Real wife. 15 years of marriage, 15 years of believing I was his only love, and there was someone else. Someone who was helping him destroy me, Marcus continued, his voice urgent. This morning, he called someone from the payphone outside. Said the commitment papers were ready and that by tonight, you'd be in a facility where no one would believe anything you said. He laughed about it. I gripped the edge of the counter to steady myself. What do I do? My truck's out back. I can get you to the police station in the next town. But we have to go now. He's getting suspicious. I looked through the store window and saw David pacing beside our car, checking his watch. Everything about his body language screamed impatience, urgency. He wasn't a husband waiting for his wife. He was a predator waiting for his victim. Okay, I whispered. Help me. Marcus led me through the back exit to his old pickup truck. As we drove away, I saw David in the rearview mirror, running toward the store, his face a mask of fury and panic. The man I'd loved for 15 years, the man I'd trusted with my life, was watching his carefully constructed plan crumble. At the police station in the small town of Millbrook, I met Detective Sarah Chen, a woman who'd seen enough domestic cases to recognize the signs immediately. I told her everything, the fake psychiatric evaluation, the mysterious phone calls, the plot to have me committed. We can't arrest him based on what you've told me, she said, but we can definitely investigate. And we need to get you somewhere safe while we do. Marcus took me to his aunt's house, a small ranch-style home where Maria Santos welcomed me with the kind of warmth I hadn't felt in years. That night, I called my college roommate, Jennifer, who lived in Albany. Within hours, she'd connected me with a private investigator named Thomas Reed. Thomas was a former police detective who specialized in marital fraud cases. 3 days later, he called with information that shattered what remained of my world. Rebecca, your husband's real name is David Russell. He's been married to Amanda Russell for 18 years. They have 2 children together, and they live in Pittsburgh. The marriage license with your name? It's fake. You were never legally married to him. I sat in Maria's living room, holding the phone with numb fingers. What do you mean, fake? David Russell is a professional con artist. He targets women who've recently inherited money or property. He builds relationships with them, marries them in ceremonies that aren't legally binding, and then systematically drains their assets. You're the 4th woman he's done this to. The 4th woman. I wasn't special. I wasn't loved. I was just another victim in a long line of women who'd been fooled by his charm, his lies, his calculated affection. Thomas continued, Amanda Russell is his partner. She helps him research potential targets, forge documents, and create the fake psychiatric evaluations. They've been planning to have you committed for 6 months, giving David power of attorney over your assets while you're institutionalized. How did they know about my inheritance? David has been monitoring your mail, your bank statements, your communications with your parents' attorney. He knew about the inheritance before you did. The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. David's sudden interest in romance, the trip to Buffalo, the route that would take us past that psychiatric facility, it had all been orchestrated. Even his love, his comfort during my grief, had been part of the performance, but Thomas had more information. There's something else. Marcus Williams, the gas station attendant who helped you? His sister was David's second victim. She's been in a psychiatric facility in Ohio for 2 years, declared incompetent after David cleaned out her accounts. Marcus has been tracking David ever since, trying to build a case against him. I thought of Marcus, this young man who'd risked everything to save a stranger because he couldn't save his own sister. He'd been watching, waiting, hoping to prevent David from destroying another life. With Thomas's evidence and Jennifer's legal connections, we built a case that stretched across 3 states. The fake psychiatric evaluations, the forged marriage documents, the financial records showing David's pattern of targeting recently widowed or divorced women. It all pointed to a sophisticated long-term con. 6 weeks later, David Russell was arrested at a hotel in Pittsburgh where he'd been hiding with Amanda. The charges included fraud, conspiracy, forgery, and attempted kidnapping. Amanda was charged as an accessory. I'll never forget the day I testified in court. David sat at the defendant's table, wearing the same charming smile that had fooled me for 15 years. But his eyes were cold, calculating, empty of any genuine emotion. He looked at me like I was an obstacle that had inconveniently gotten in his way. The prosecutor presented evidence of David's 3 previous victims. Sarah from Michigan, who'd lost her family farm and spent 18 months in psychiatric care. Jennifer from Indiana, who'd been committed after David convinced her family she was suicidal. And Marcus's sister, Lisa, who was still fighting to regain her mental health and her stolen assets. When the verdict was read, guilty on all charges, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Not happiness, not satisfaction, but a deep, quiet sense of justice. David was sentenced to 12 years in federal prison. Amanda received 8 years. As the officers led him away, David looked back at me one last time. His mask had finally slipped completely, revealing the predator beneath. "You have no idea what you've done," he said, his voice filled with venom. "You'll never find anyone who'll love you like I did." I stared back at him, my voice steady and clear. "You never loved me, David. You don't even know what love is." That was the last time I saw him. I sold the house in Rochester and moved to a small coastal town called Seabrook in New Hampshire. The house I bought was modest, nothing like the grand home David and I had shared, but it was mine. Truly mine. No lies, no deception, no hidden agendas. The healing process was slow. Some days I'd wake up and still expect to see David making coffee in the kitchen, and I'd have to remind myself that the man I'd loved had never really existed. He was a character David had created, a performance so convincing that even I, who knew him better than anyone, had believed it completely. But there were good days too. Days when I'd sit on my porch, watching the waves crash against the rocks, and feel grateful for the truth, painful as it was. Days when I'd remember Marcus's courage, Maria's kindness, Thomas's dedication to justice, and realize that not everyone in the world was like David. I started volunteering at a local women's shelter, helping others who'd been victims of domestic fraud and abuse. There's something powerful about sharing your story with people who understand, who don't judge, who know that loving someone and being deceived by them aren't mutually exclusive. One afternoon, about 4 months after the trial, I got a call from Marcus. Lisa, his sister, had been released from the psychiatric facility and was slowly rebuilding her life. She wanted to meet me, to thank me for stopping David before he could hurt anyone else. We met at a small cafe in Portland. Lisa was younger than I'd expected, maybe 35, with the kind of fragile strength that comes from surviving something terrible. She told me about her ordeal, how David had isolated her from her family, convinced her she was losing her mind, and had her committed when she started questioning his control over her finances. "I spent 2 years believing I was crazy," she said, tears streaming down her face. "He was so convincing, so gentle when he explained how sick I was. Even the doctors believed him." We talked for hours, sharing our experiences, our pain, our slow journey toward healing. When we parted, Lisa hugged me tightly. "You saved me," she whispered. "By stopping him, you saved me." That night, I called Marcus to thank him again. We'd been texting regularly since the trial, and I'd learned that he'd dropped out of college to work full-time, supporting his family while Lisa recovered. He was planning to finish his degree in criminal justice, hoping to help other victims of fraud and abuse. "You changed my life too," I told him. "You showed me that there are still good people in the world, people who risk everything to help strangers." "You would have done the same thing," he said. "Good people recognize each other." As I write this, it's been 8 months since that day at the gas station. 8 months since my world collapsed and was rebuilt on a foundation of truth instead of lies. The woman who was deceived, who was targeted, who was almost destroyed, she's still part of me, but she's not all of me. I've learned that healing isn't about forgetting or forgiving. It's about accepting the truth, processing the pain, and choosing to move forward with wisdom instead of bitterness. David stole 15 years of my life, but he didn't steal my future. Some nights, I still wake up thinking about those other women, the ones who weren't as lucky as I was. The ones who didn't have a Marcus watching over them, who didn't escape in time. I think about how many David Russells are out there, charming and patient and willing to spend years building trust just to destroy it for money, but I also think about the people who helped me. Marcus, Maria, Thomas, Jennifer, Detective Chen, even the prosecutor who fought so hard for justice. They remind me that for every predator, there are dozens of people willing to stand up and fight back. The house in Seabrook is quiet now, but it's a good quiet. The kind of quiet that comes from peace, not loneliness. I've started painting again, something I gave up years ago when David convinced me I wasn't talented enough. Turns out, I'm not bad at landscapes. The ocean provides endless inspiration. Last month, I got a letter from the FBI. They'd used our case to track down David's other victims, women from Florida, Texas, and California who'd been targeted by his network. 3 more women had been rescued from psychiatric facilities where they'd been held against their will. The investigation had uncovered an entire organization of con artists who specialized in targeting vulnerable women. I testified via video link at their trials, adding my voice to the growing chorus of survivors who refused to be silenced. Each time I tell my story, it gets a little easier. Each time, I remember that my pain has purpose. Today, I volunteer at the local crisis center, helping women who've been victims of domestic abuse and fraud. I teach them what I learned, that love and manipulation can look identical from the inside, that trusting someone and being deceived by them doesn't make you weak or stupid, and that surviving doesn't mean you have to carry the weight of someone else's cruelty forever. ***. When women ask me how I knew to trust Marcus, how I found the courage to run, I tell them the truth. I almost didn't. I was so programmed to doubt myself, to defer to David's judgment, that I almost dismissed the warning as a mistake. But somewhere deep inside, in a place David couldn't reach, I still knew the difference between love and control. That's the part of yourself you have to protect, the part that knows truth from lies, kindness from manipulation, love from possession. David spent 15 years trying to destroy that part of me, but he failed. And that failure, more than any prison sentence, is his real defeat. The sun is setting over the ocean now, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Tomorrow, I'll wake up in my own house, make my own choices, live my own life. David Russell is in prison, but more importantly, he's out of my head. The woman he targeted, the woman he tried to destroy, has discovered something he never understood. She's stronger than he ever was. She's free. And she's finally, truly, home. The months that followed brought unexpected connections. Through the Victim Support Network, I met Dr. Patricia Wells, a psychiatrist who specialized in treating survivors of psychological manipulation. She helped me understand the sophisticated techniques David had used, the gradual isolation, the gaslighting, the way he'd slowly eroded my confidence while positioning himself as my protector. What you experienced, Dr. Wells explained during one of our sessions, is called coercive control. It's a form of psychological warfare designed to make you dependent on your abuser's version of reality. The fact that you recognized the warning signs, that you trusted Marcus despite David's conditioning, that takes incredible strength. Those sessions helped me understand that I wasn't weak for being deceived. David was a professional, someone who'd spent years perfecting his craft. He'd studied psychology, understood human vulnerability, and used that knowledge to exploit women at their most vulnerable moments, but knowing the clinical terms for what happened didn't erase the emotional impact. There were still nights when I'd wake up in a cold sweat, dreams filled with psychiatric evaluations and locked doors. Still days when I'd question my own judgment, wondering if I'd ever be able to trust again. That's when I met Eleanor. Eleanor Whitman was 78 years old, a retired teacher who'd moved to Seabrook after her husband's death. She lived 2 houses down from me, and we'd wave politely when we passed each other on our morning walks. But it wasn't until she showed up at my door one rainy Thursday evening that I realized how much we had in common. "I heard about your situation," she said, settling into my living room chair with a cup of tea. "From the women at the shelter. I wanted you to know, you're not alone." Eleanor's story was eerily similar to mine. 5 years after her husband's death, she'd met Robert, a charming widower who'd swept her off her feet. They'd had a small wedding, combined their finances, and planned to travel the world together. But Robert had been systematically draining her accounts, forging her signature, and preparing to have her declared incompetent due to early dementia. "He almost succeeded," Eleanor said, her voice steady despite the pain in her eyes. "If my granddaughter hadn't gotten suspicious about some of the financial documents, I would have lost everything." As it was, he disappeared with nearly $200,000. Did they catch him? Eventually. Turns out he'd done the same thing to 4 other elderly women across New England. He's serving 15 years now, but the money's gone. He spent it all on his real girlfriend, a woman 20 years younger who helped him target us. Eleanor's strength amazed me. She'd rebuilt her life at an age when most people are slowing down, started a support group for elderly fraud victims, and even testified before Congress about the growing problem of financial abuse against seniors. "The thing is," she said, "I don't regret loving Robert. Even knowing what he was, I don't regret opening my heart. Because the alternative, becoming bitter, closed off, suspicious of everyone, that would have been letting him win. Her words stayed with me long after she left. Eleanor had found a way to separate the love she'd given from the lies she'd been told. She'd refused to let Robert's cruelty poison her capacity for trust, for joy, for connection. That weekend, I decided to do something I'd been putting off for months. I called my sister, Michelle, who lived in Boston. Michelle and I had been close growing up, but during my marriage to David, we'd gradually drifted apart. Now I understood why. David had subtly discouraged our relationship, always finding reasons why I couldn't visit, why Michelle's calls were interruptions, why our family connections were somehow threats to our marriage. Rebecca? Michelle's voice was cautious when she answered. Are you okay? I heard about everything. I'm okay, I said, surprising myself by meaning it. But I wanted to apologize. For pulling away, for all the times I chose David over family. For not seeing what was happening. You don't need to apologize, Michelle said, her voice thick with emotion. I knew something was wrong, but I didn't know how to help. Every time I tried to express concern, you defend him so strongly. He trained me to, I said. That's what abusers do. They make you their accomplice in your own isolation. We talked for 3 hours, rebuilding a relationship that David had tried to destroy. Michelle told me about her kids, her job, her divorce 2 years earlier. I told her about Seabrook, about my volunteer work, about the slow process of rediscovering who I was without David's influence. I want to come visit, Michelle said. I want to see this new life you're building. I'd love that, I said. I'd really love that. Michelle's visit 2 weeks later was a turning point. She met Eleanor, came with me to the shelter, walked the beaches I'd grown to love. Seeing my new life through her eyes, I realized how much I'd healed, how much I'd grown. You seem yourself again, Michelle said on her last night. Not the version of yourself you were during the marriage, but the person you were before David. Strong, independent, thoughtful. I'm getting there, I said. Some days are better than others. That's okay, Michelle said. Healing isn't linear. It's okay to have bad days. After Michelle left, I found myself thinking about forgiveness. Not forgiving David. I wasn't sure I'd ever get there, and Dr. Wells had assured me that wasn't necessary for healing. But forgiving myself. For the years I'd lost, for the signs I'd missed, for the trust I'd given to someone who didn't deserve it. The breakthrough came during a particularly difficult session with Dr. Wells. I'd been talking about the shame I felt, the embarrassment of being so thoroughly deceived. Rebecca, she said, what would you say to another woman who'd been through what you've been through? I'd tell her it wasn't her fault, I said without hesitation. That she was targeted by someone who was skilled at manipulation, that being deceived doesn't make her weak or stupid. Then why can't you give yourself that same compassion? The question hung in the air between us. Why couldn't I? Why was I holding myself to a standard of perfection that I'd never apply to anyone else? That night, I sat on my porch watching the stars reflect on the water. For the first time in months, I felt something approaching peace. Not the absence of pain, but the presence of acceptance. I'd been victimized, but I'd also survived. I'd been deceived, but I'd also found the courage to seek truth. I'd lost 15 years, but I'd also gained wisdom, strength, and a deeper understanding of my own resilience. The next morning, I got a call from Thomas Reed, the private investigator who'd helped build the case against David. He had news about the federal investigation. They've uncovered something big, he said. David's network was part of a larger operation. They've identified over 30 victims across 15 states, and they're estimating the total financial damage at over $15 million. $15 million? I couldn't comprehend the scale. Rebecca, your case was the key that broke it all open. Because you escaped, because you fought back, because you testified, they were able to trace the entire network. You didn't just save yourself. You saved dozens of other women. After I hung up, I sat in my kitchen, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what had been uncovered. All those women, all those lives destroyed by greed and cruelty. But also all those women who would be saved because the network had been exposed. I thought about Marcus, who'd risked everything to save a stranger. About Eleanor, who'd refused to let victimization define her. About Michelle, who'd welcomed me back with open arms. About Dr. Wells, who'd helped me understand that survival was its own form of victory. That afternoon, I drove to Portland to meet with Janet Morrison, a journalist who was writing a book about the federal investigation. She wanted to interview me about my experience, to help other women recognize the warning signs of coercive control. What would you want women to know? She asked as we sat in her office. That love shouldn't make you smaller, I said. That a partner who truly cares about you will encourage your relationships with family and friends, not discourage them. That someone who loves you will want you to be strong and independent, not dependent and isolated. What about the financial red flags? Any partner who wants to control your money is a partner who wants to control you. Joint accounts are one thing, but if someone insists on handling all your finances, if they prevent you from seeing statements or making decisions about your own money, that's not love. That's control. Janet took notes as I spoke, occasionally asking follow-up questions. When we finished, she said something that surprised me. You know, Rebecca, I've interviewed dozens of survivors for this book. The ones who've healed the most completely are the ones who found a way to use their experience to help others. They've transformed their pain into purpose. Purpose. The word stayed with me during the drive home. Was that what I'd been doing? Without realizing it? Transforming my pain into purpose. That evening, I called Marcus. We'd been texting regularly, and I'd learned that he'd finished his degree and was working as a victim advocate in Buffalo. Lisa had moved to California and was working as a counselor for survivors of psychological abuse. I've been thinking, I said, about starting a foundation. Something to help victims of financial fraud and coercive control. Education, legal support, counseling resources. That's a great idea, Marcus said. What would you need to get started? I don't know. I've never started a foundation before. But I have some of the money from the house sale left, and I think this is what I want to do with it. Lisa would want to help, Marcus said. She's been talking about ways to expand victim services. And I know other survivors who might want to get involved. The idea began to take shape over the following weeks. The Matthews Foundation for Survivor Support would focus on 3 areas: education about the warning signs of financial abuse, legal assistance for victims trying to recover stolen assets, and counseling services for survivors dealing with the psychological aftermath of coercive control. I reached out to Dr. Wells, who agreed to serve on the advisory board. Eleanor offered to help with fundraising and community outreach. Michelle connected me with a lawyer in Boston who specialized in nonprofit law. 6 months later, the foundation was officially incorporated. Our first grant recipient was a women's shelter in Syracuse that needed funding for financial counseling services. Our second was a legal aid organization in Pittsburgh that represented victims of domestic fraud. The day we announced the foundation's launch, I stood in the community center in Seabrook, looking out at a room full of survivors, advocates, and supporters. Marcus had driven down from Buffalo with Lisa, who'd flown in from California. Eleanor sat in the front row, beaming with pride. Michelle had brought her kids, my nephews I'd barely seen during the years with David. 2 years ago, I said, I was a victim. Someone who'd been deceived, manipulated, and almost destroyed by a person I trusted completely. Today, I'm a survivor. But more than that, I'm someone who's learned that survival isn't enough. We have to take our experiences and use them to protect others. The applause was warm, supportive, but what moved me most was the look in people's eyes. The understanding, the recognition, the shared determination to turn pain into power. After the event, as people mingled and shared their stories, I found myself standing outside, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors. Marcus joined me, holding 2 cups of coffee. How does it feel? He asked. Overwhelming, I said. But good. Like I'm finally doing what I'm supposed to be doing. You know, Marcus said, when I slipped you that note at the gas station, I had no idea it would lead to all this. I just knew I couldn't let what happened to Lisa happen to you. And now look what we've built, I said. A foundation that's going to help thousands of people. It's incredible what can grow from one act of courage. As we stood there, watching the waves crash against the shore, I realized something profound. David had tried to erase me, to reduce me to a psychiatric file and a bank account. But in the process of surviving him, I discovered who I really was. Not the woman who'd been deceived, but the woman who'd fought back. Not the victim who'd been targeted, but the survivor who'd refused to be destroyed. The foundation was just the beginning. We were planning educational workshops for high schools and colleges, training programs for healthcare workers and police officers, and a national database of financial predators. We were building something that would outlast all of us, something that would protect future generations from the kind of systematic abuse that had almost destroyed me. That night, I called Dr. Wells to tell her about the event. I'm proud of you, Rebecca, she said. You've taken the worst experience of your life and transformed it into something beautiful. That's not just healing, that's transcendence. Transcendence. The word felt right. I'd transcended victimhood, transcended shame, transcended the limitations that David had tried to impose on my life. I'd become someone I'd never imagined I could be, not despite my experience with David, but because of it.as I write this. It's been 2 years since that day at the gas station. 2 years since Marcus saved my life, since I discovered the truth about David, since I began the long journey from victim to survivor to advocate. The foundation has grown beyond my wildest expectations. We've helped over 300 survivors, funded legal cases in 12 states, and our educational programs have reached thousands of people. We're working with federal agencies to improve training for prosecutors handling financial abuse cases. And we're developing new resources for healthcare providers who work with elderly victims, but perhaps most importantly, we've created a community. A network of survivors who support each other, who share their stories, who refuse to let their experiences be wasted. We've taken the isolation that our abusers used as a weapon and transformed it into connection, strength, and hope. I still live in the house in Seabrook, but it's fuller now. Michelle visits regularly with her kids. Eleanor and I have Sunday dinners together. Marcus has become one of my closest friends, and Lisa calls me her sister survivor. Dr. Wells continues to provide guidance and support, not just for me but for all the survivors the foundation serves. Sometimes people ask me if I regret those 15 years with David. It's a complicated question. I regret the pain, the deception, the time lost. But I don't regret the person I became as a result of surviving him. I don't regret the strength I discovered, the purpose I found, the connections I've made with other survivors. David Russell is still in prison, and he'll be there for many more years. But more importantly, he's powerless. The network he was part of has been dismantled. The women he targeted are free, and the women he might have targeted are protected. His legacy isn't the destruction he intended to create, but the healing and hope that grew from his victim's refusal to be destroyed. The woman who was driven to that gas station 2 years ago, she was broken, confused, terrified. But she was also brave. Brave enough to trust a stranger, brave enough to run, brave enough to fight back. That bravery has grown into something I never expected, not just survival, but purpose. Not just healing, but transformation. The sun is setting over the ocean again, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Tomorrow, I'll wake up in my own bed, in my own house, living my own life. I'll work on foundation business, maybe paint a new landscape, definitely call Michelle to check on my nephews. It will be a good day because it will be my day, chosen by me, lived on my terms. David Russell tried to write the story of my life. He failed. The story he never imagined, the story he never could have written, is the one I'm living now. It's a story of survival, of strength, of the power of human connection to overcome even the most calculated cruelty, and it's a story that's still being written, one day at a time, one choice at a time, one act of courage at a time. What happened next? I became everything he never wanted me to be. Free. Strong. Unbreakable. And I'm just getting started.